I'm going to go ahead and get started with our meeting. I know that there's some participants here already, and I want to honor their time, and the time of our gracious panelists. My name is Anita Flemington, and I'm president of AICCU Ed. That's the Association of Independent Colleges in California, colleges and universities, and we are the teacher ed division. So I just want to say thank you to several people who have made this possible, including my board. I was hoping my board would be, you'd be able to see them, but we've had to do some technical issues, so we won't be able to see them, but they are in the chat if you want to chat with them. AICCU Ed advocates for independent colleges and universities, small and large, throughout California and beyond, if people contact us. We've been particularly busy during the pandemic and during the summer, working with teacher education programs around issues of field work and resources. Those have been some major issues for us. So we've been trying to do outreach and trying to get information from different institutions about that and getting out the information on that. I just want to do a plug for our conference. Thank you for attending this meeting. In addition, we have a joint meeting on Thursday. I believe it is at 10 o'clock, Alan, is that correct? Okay. This is a wonderful meeting because it's a joint meeting with COBTE, the bilingual teacher ed, CAPC for the special ed, and AICCU Ed. And we are meeting with the commission, and so we're surrounding relevant issues and different policies that are coming out. I do want to say that we have a space on our board for president-elect. So if you're an individual who is interested in getting involved in AICCU Ed and becoming the president, then please contact me, Anita Flemington, at the University of La Verne, and I will work with you. Our contact information will be in the chat. So we would like to get on with our panel because I'm sure that's what most of you are interested in. Just a little background. After the June events, the protests, Black Lives Matter, our organization's CCTE put out a statement, and that is posted on our website under news items. So this is an anti-racist statement. So different organizations got together and started to put together ideas of how they would respond. I talked with the board, and they decided that they wanted to do something that was proactive and involved teacher education. So then I went and had a conversation with my dean, Kimberly White-Smith, and she came up with the wonderful idea of putting together a panel. So I must say that this goes back to Kimberly and coming up with this wonderful idea and volunteering to be the mediator or the host of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly, and she'll introduce the members. One thing I'd like to say is that there's the Q&A function. So what each individual is going to do is to make a short presentation. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will make sure that Kimberly receives those questions so that she can, at the end, give them to the different participants. So I am going to turn my camera off and mute and turn it over to Kimberly White-Smith. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. And you have really been a great leader for AICCU Ed. And I really appreciate your service to the organization and helping to move us forward, especially during this most difficult time that the nation is experiencing now, and especially our sector. So thank you so much for that. This is a topic that's very close to my heart. As some of you who know me know, this is also my area of research. And as a dean and as a leader in the sector, this has been a critical stance for me in all the work that I have done across all of the institutions and organizations that I've worked with. And so the title of today's program is called Culturally Responsive Practices in Teacher Education Programs, Helping to Stem the Tide of School to Prison Pipelines for Black and Latinx students. I'm assuming that most of you might be teacher educators, so you already know about the disproportionate surveillance and discipline that happens in schools, paired with disproportionate labeling in special education for Black and Brown children. Black boys are suspended 3 times the amount that the white boys in our PK-12 system are suspended. And when you look at the numbers and you look at those who eventually end up incarcerated, it's really a stark and abysmal connotation on our schools and our education system. We need to understand that schools are designed for the outcomes that we're currently seeing. When we look at a system that is built on structural inequality from the beginning, that positions and advantages middle income white families and disadvantages and sees as deficits families of marginalized communities. So African Americans, Latinx families, indigenous families. When parents are not given opportunities to participate in the education system because we make deficit judgments about how parent participation is supposed to be, what it's supposed to look like. You're supposed to have time in the middle of the day to come up to the school and volunteer and bring cupcakes, then that's a problem. And so today we have our panelists who are going to discuss in very real, on the ground ways that we in teacher education are currently addressing this issue and this systemic problem. We have with us today Angel Miles Nash, who is an assistant professor of leadership education in the Donna Ford Atala College of Educational Studies at Chapman University. Also, we have Christian Bracho, associate professor of teacher education at the La Fecha College of Education at the University of Laverne. He is also the co-director of the Center for Educational Equity and Intercultural Research. Alongside him, we have Dr. Nikki Elliott, who is the co-director for the Center of Neurodiversity, Learning, and Wellness, also at the La Fecha College of Education at the University of Laverne. And lastly, we have Don Smith, who is the assistant principal of Santiago High School and the Corona Norco Unified School District, an advanced placement leadership team empowering teachers to improve equity and access to rigor. Welcome, panelists, and thank you all so much. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to each panelist to give a 7-minute presentation, followed by question and answers, and we'll start with Angel.
Thank you, Kimberly. I sincerely appreciate it. I'm going to pull up our slides and get us started. Okay, can you see them? Thank you for the confirmation. So thank you, Dean White-Smith and Dr. Flemington, for inviting me to be a part of this panel of powerful scholars and practitioners. I consider it an honor and privilege to share this space, and I appreciate your well-rounded approach to this panel and demonstrating how it's important for us to take theory to practice. So to that end, I've been tasked with presenting how research informs our disruption of existing states of harmful pipelines and nexuses in schools, and how our development of research can be used to inform our preparation of teachers and educational leaders. I know I only have 7 minutes to do so, so I want to take a brief moment to help us set the stage by asking you to close your eyes, all participants and panelists, if you can. Presumably most of us are in our homes or in spaces that we can easily do so. So if you please close your eyes and try to imagine your College of Education, and in particular, the most welcoming space in that building or perhaps set of buildings. Whether it's the entry or foyer, a particular office, or perhaps a classroom, visualize that welcoming space in your mind and picture yourself occupying that space and then hearing a voice suggesting this question. Are you lost? You can open your eyes now. I offer this scenario because it is my reality, and it was a reality of one afternoon in my College of Education as a doctoral student. However harmless that question may have seemed or even been, it sticks with me to this day because the nuanced question felt like a suggestion that I, a student, a Black woman standing there with my book bag on my back, may have somehow been out of place, that I did not belong. And if we take a look at any given snapshot of the over-disciplining of students of color in US education, particularly Black and Latinx children in schools, I believe that it's the same feeling that educators and educational systems may be imparting on them, that they don't belong. My work is more than an agenda, it's a research commitment. Through my research, I've prioritized focusing on asset-based investigations of Black girls and students of color in an attempt to counter the rhetoric that is perpetuated about them. I recognize that this takes a holistic approach to determining what they aspire to in order to prepare educators to support them in their pursuits. I also acknowledge that in the academy, there's a small number of faculty, particularly Black women, who prepare teachers. And I believe that Black women in and of themselves are text in the academy. So to hold the academy accountable for improving that, I investigate the experiences of Black women faculty to determine how their intersectional dispositions inform their work and thereby their leadership. Today, I'll focus on my work with Black girls, and we'll leave holding the academy accountable for another day in conversation. So intersectionality undergirds my work and serves as a cheesecloth for my approach to understanding students' lives. Crenshaw asserted that in her foundational scholarship, grounded of course in critical legal studies, intersectionality is the problematic consequence of the tendency to treat race and gender as mutually exclusive. And further, in 1991, she went on to assert that frequently it's the product of intersecting patterns of racism and sexism. I believe Black girls show up to the school ready to learn. So to explore this belief, I began using intersectionality as a lens to explore Black girls' experiences in K-12 spaces where they are underserved, such as in STEM education. Recently, we secured an AERA Education Research Service Project grant to partner with a local school district to support Black girls through critical conversation spaces. Through that project called She Can't Breathe, Black girls in the intersection of #SayHerName and COVID-19, my co-PI and I will explore and pay particular attention to the ways that the current pandemic and the recent racial uprising has affected Black girls in California high schools. I also recently sought and received internal funding from my university to partner with local school districts and establish the My Crown Project, which stands for Math for Youth and Chemistry Rooted in Organic Wisdom Now. It is a policy-informed approach to emboldening girls of color to affirm their curiosities in exploring STEM disciplines related to healthcare and hair health and care while learning how to use their voices to become engaged civically. Of course, the My Crown project is based on the passing recently of the Crown Act, SB 188, which is our state's intention, our state being the first across the country to do so, to protect people from being discriminated against because of the natural state of their hair. This research interest has also informed an Impress book chapter I co-authored entitled She Wears a Crown, Centering Black Girlhood in Schools, in the forthcoming book, Teaching Beautiful, Brilliant Black Girls, How to Curate Classrooms for Radical Transformation, which is being published by Corwin Press. So centering a holistic approach, I think it's important for us to recognize the roles families play in the lives of girls of color, while being very careful not to deficitize the ways that families demonstrate care, as Dr. Whitesmith just mentioned. So I, along with two co-PIs, recently received funding from the Spencer Foundation to understand how parent learning walks in different types of schools informs parent engagement. This project is currently underway, and we're very eager to share what we're learning with teacher educators, their students, and practitioners at the conclusion of the project. I'll conclude by offering that Black girls and girls of color often enter schools seeing themselves in very good light. Until our educational systems writ large see and treat them that way, it is our responsibility to prepare our students, future educators, one by one, to see them as brilliant. Because simply put, they do belong, and they are not lost. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you, and I promise I liked reading as a child despite my look on this picture.
That is absolutely adorable. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Christian Bradshaw.
Good morning. Can that screen, everyone see that screen now?
Yes.
Angel, thank you so much for your presentation. I love listening to your research, and I think it's really exciting you've got the chance to get it funded by really important people who will understand the value of it. So I'm going to just go ahead and jump in. I'm going to focus in today on the work I do in a particular course at the Lefevre College of Education. The course is EDU 442, Intermediate Teaching Strategies. I think that this course is an adolescent learning course, and so we cover a few key items: theories of learning, adolescent development, UDL, culture development pedagogy, and end with restorative practices. And I think of the guiding question of this course as, what are the best ways to equitably support adolescents in diverse learning environments? This course has been rewritten over the years since I joined Laverne, so I think it's something that I've been really passionate about. Some of my background personally is in nonviolence education, the idea that we can incorporate peace and justice and nonviolence into our coursework with young people. And so I've tried to incorporate the restorative practice element with my teacher candidates, particularly because TPE 2.1 and 2.2 talk about restorative justice, caring communities, and being culture responsive. So one of the things I start off the course with the students is going over theories of learning, constructivism, behaviorism, etc. And we talk about the ways that learning occurs. We talk about adolescent development, and this is an article by Curtis, 2015, around the different dimensions of adolescent development, how people move, young people move from early adolescence to adolescence to young adulthood. But one of the things we end on in this discussion is that learning and development are not separate from culture. A lot of learning theories and a lot of developmental theories of adolescence don't really get into how culture shapes our experiences. And so one of the things that I impress upon the students is that students' cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic lives are integral to how they learn and the way they make sense of the world. And so one of the ways we dive into that is by looking at Geneva Gay's article, Teaching to Cultural Diversity. And so one of the things that I think is really critical when we look at that article is the idea that Gay talks about culture responsive teaching, CRT, as being contingent on several things. As Kimberly mentioned earlier, having an asset mindset, thinking of cultural differences as an asset versus a deficit, creating caring learning communities, focusing on our relationships with students, challenging stereotypes and bias, being change agents, mediating power imbalances, and accepting that cultural responsiveness is endemic to educational effectiveness. And so one of the ways we dive into that, for me, that's really important is the second bullet point about creating a caring learning community, and the third point about building relationships with students. And the reason this is important is because for our candidates, they're going to exit our program and enter schools that are incredibly diverse. In California, 54% of our students are Latino, 9% are Asian, 6% are African American. And so I try to give them resources for their subjects. You can see at the bottom there are a list of all the CRT resources for literacy, math, music, PE, etc. But then we get into the idea that if their state is so diverse, why is it that our Latino and African American students are having the highest dropout rates in California? What is going on? What is happening that we are pushing students out of school? And so we read the book Better Than Carrots or Sticks by Smith, Fisher, and Fry in 2015 and talk about the school to prison pipeline. And as Kimberly mentioned, one of the things that we talk about initially is that Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than white students. Or that females of color are suspended at a rate of 12% compared to 2% for white girls. So these numbers, this data for me is really important because I think a lot of times students, particularly students who are resistant to these concepts, need hard data to see that there's actual quantitative measures that can look at the way that our actions in schools lead to the criminalization of Black and brown students. So things like the fact that Black students are only 16% of public school enrollment represent 42% of multiple suspensions. Or at the bottom there from the ACLU graphic, students who are suspended or expelled for discretionary violation are nearly 3 times more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system the following year. To me, this is really striking. What I try to tell our teacher candidates is that the choices we make and the way that we treat our students can have long-reaching impact, has a reach that we can't always even fathom in the moment that we make those decisions. So we talk in the book by looking at the Smith, Fisher, and Fry book about what does it mean to have a restorative approach in the classroom. For those of you who are familiar with restorative justice, it comes from a tradition of not necessarily punishing people who have committed infractions or violations of a particular code, but more about restoring them, right? Bringing them back together, integrating them back into the community. So instead of thinking about justice focusing on guilt, we're thinking about needs and obligations, about the relationships being restored, about accountability being about understanding the effects of the offense and repairing harm versus a simply punitive approach. And so these things are really important because I think a lot of times teachers walk into a classroom who are new and are sometimes very reactive, and they don't necessarily think about how they respond in the moment can have a punitive impact that can, again, lead to criminalization in the long term. So we talk about what does it mean to be restorative? How can we be inviting by being positive, by being purposeful, by being sensitive? And I see, if you see that in that graphic, it says growth mindset. I'm of the mindset that we shouldn't think of students having a growth mindset. It should be that as teachers, we have to have a growth mindset. How can we grow to meet the needs of our students? So we talk about how being restorative means thinking about how we listen and how we respond. Some of you might know Catherine Schultz's article on listening as a framework for teaching across difference. The idea that we need to listen for students' voices, for the context of their lives, and the ways that we respond in the moment, instead of shutting down conversation, instead of being always corrective or just telling students that they're wrong, we need to think about the ways that we open up conversation, that we dialogue. So this book has some really great conversational moves that you can make as a teacher to invite more conversation, to invite dialogue, to create a relationship that is more two-way versus just one directional. And so one of the things I think is really critical is that the book talks about how we need to be thinking about our decisions in the classroom when we respond to student behavior. So one of the activities I do in my class is I have students look at common scenarios where students are acting up, students are giggling, students are doing things that maybe kind of make the teacher kind of upset, and how sometimes teachers respond in ways that are very punitive. So we need to look at that, and I put the arrow there, right, to the most important question. What's the function of the behavior? Sometimes we just respond immediately because we're pissed off or we're angry as a teacher because we are feeling like they're getting in the way of the flow that we've created. But sometimes we need to stop and think, what's the function? Why is this thing happening in my classroom? Thank you, Kimberly. And so I want to have students practice looking at scenarios that are very common, things that are like happening in the classroom that occur in many types of situations. But instead of having the punitive, reactive approach, how can we think of a more restorative approach that really tends to understand and listen and find out why this behavior has occurred and decide whether we need to call out the behavior in the moment or wait until later? Because sometimes when we do it in the moment, we create a moment in the room that's very tense, a very big conflict. Sometimes the students watch the teacher and the student get into an ugly moment, and it can really create a very difficult learning community for everybody. And so what we talk about restorative practices for students and things like student interest surveys, even a KWL chart is an example of showing students you care about their interests, doing social emotional check-ins, focusing on norms over rules, what kind of things we want to feel versus what kind of rules we want to have in the room, affective statements that are about building students' identity, building their sense of agency, having informal class meetings, having classroom circles, and the strategy that we talk about a lot is unwind, rewind, wind up. When something has happened, we try to de-escalate, take a step back, what actually occurred, and then wind back up and get people back into the room, restore them into the classroom conversation. So I'm happy to talk more about those elements a bit further if you're interested, but for now I want to thank you for your time. Thank you. Let me stop sharing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bracho. That's very exciting. I like that. Dr. Nikki Elliott. Nikki, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry about that. I said good morning. It is an absolute pleasure to be with all of you today. And I'd like to thank Dean White-Smith and Dr. Nita Flemington for the invitation and the opportunity to share with you the exciting work that we are doing at the Center for Neurodiversity, Learning, and Wellness. The focus of our work is to be the bridge between the research that is conducted in our College of Teacher Ed and having a direct impact on transforming the actual practices of our local community school districts and education agencies in the community with regard to supporting students who fit the categories of neurodiversity, which would be autism, ADHD, dyslexia, emotional and behavioral challenges. We know that there's a significant increase in the amount of mental health diagnoses that impact our student body. And so we have developed over the last 4 years a multifaceted approach of providing educational services and professional training and community engagement. And so what I'd like to share with you today is one of the primary outgrowths of our work and giving you an example of a partnership that we have formed with San Bernardino City Unified and the transformative difference that we have begun to make with disrupting the school to prison pipeline by helping teachers understand how to engage in healing ways with the students they serve, particularly our Black and Brown students whose behaviors, particularly relative to ADHD and emotional disturbance, are often misinterpreted and misdiagnosed. So our 3 main goals of our project are to, number 1, help the neurodivergent learner themselves see themselves from an assets and strengths-based approach and to kind of redefine what their life is and what their capabilities and gifts are beyond their labels. Our major thrust that we're going to talk about today is this work that we do with preparing educators, and my specific focus is around the lens of preparing retraining in-service teachers to understand the current research around neurobiology, mindfulness, trauma-informed teaching. So many of our Black and Brown students are taught by veteran teachers who have graduated from teacher ed programs years, if not decades ago, and they have not had opportunities to have their education refreshed to understand the current research and best practices that can make a difference for our youth. So it's pretty much where we're having our maximum impact at this time. And again, our overarching goal is to transform social discourse through our professional development and conferences. So you can see this young man here in the corner. This is a vision of our center, which I miss very much now that we are all sheltering in place. But we work to create what we call energetically nourishing environments for students to learn. So you can see we bring a lot of fresh plants and natural lighting into our spaces and do a lot to create calming learning spaces for students. This is a young man with dyslexia. We do know that approximately 20% of our prison population are very gifted and highly intelligent young men and women, many of whom, about 20% of whom, have undiagnosed and untreated dyslexia and other language-based learning disabilities. And so the Center for Neurodiversity, one of our leading initiatives, has been the adoption and implementation of an Orton Gillingham teacher training program, which we launched this year. And we're on track to become one of the first certified teacher training centers in the state of California. So we are working heavily to disrupt that school to prison pipeline through training teachers who can specialize in identifying and treating dyslexia in our communities, starting with Pomona Unified School District and West Covina Unified. And you'll also see here, this picture to the left is a picture of me training a group of teachers to use mindfulness practices actually to help support the behavior and self-regulation of students before they come in for their tutoring work. So we're really proud of a lot of the work that we're doing of helping to bring in an understanding of the socio-emotional needs of students who have learning differences in order to help teachers provide what we call healing-centered engagement. One of the major initiatives that we have in examining this school to prison pipeline is bringing awareness to ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences. And this is a very groundbreaking and significant study that was conducted by Kaiser Permanente with the CDC in the late 90s. And this work has been popularized in our state by a very strong initiative by our current and first Surgeon General for the state of California, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who has created a strong initiative around making sure that our schools, as well as our mental health and physical health providers, begin to understand the rate at which students have been impacted by trauma, abuse, and neglect, whether it be physical or sexual abuse, loss of home, food insecurity, living with a parent with emotional disturbance, or where there's a parent who's been incarcerated. The really interesting thing in understanding and unpacking this work is that the ACEs are not just relegated to what we would consider high impact, low income communities, but that people from all backgrounds suffer from the long-term effect of trauma. We see that in our special ed placements, a student who has experienced 3 or more adverse events in their childhood has an 80% chance of having academic concerns that could potentially lead them to a special ed placement. And particularly when that placement is toward an emotional disturbance diagnosis, we know that that accelerates a person's chances for expository discipline strategies to be implemented, which then continue to increase their chances for ending up in the school to prison pipeline. We see current research out of UCLA that's finding that it's not only the number of a child's ACEs, but that parents who have had 4 or more adverse experiences in their own childhood are more likely to give birth to a child or to raise a child who ends up with the ADHD or emotional disturbance diagnosis. The most important part of our work in the center is that through our research of making teachers aware of ACEs and having teachers work with students with a lens for helping heal the damaging effects of trauma versus being punitive in their assumptions that children are misbehaving on purpose, we drew more attention to the teacher's own ACE score. So what we're seeing now is that helping professionals in general, teachers, and particularly special ed teachers tend to have higher ACE scores themselves. And many of them have chosen the education profession due to the things that they've experienced. But we find that if teachers have not addressed their own ACEs, they're more likely to have authoritarian discipline styles, which lead to more expository discipline practices, and are more likely to experience the kind of career burnout that make them less capable to provide the kind of healing presence that students need. So to address that, we have created a partnership with San Bernardino Unified, which has resulted in a year-long certificate in neurodiversity and inclusion, which we started in 2019 with 35 teachers and expanded to 70 teachers in 2020. We train these teachers in educational neurobiology to understand how the brain and the nervous system are impacted by trauma, how the brain and nervous system are healed and engage in restoration through mindfulness practices. But we really emphasize teachers' own self-healing and providing what we call healthy co-regulation for students who have diagnoses in the soft special ed categories of ADHD and emotional disturbance. And through these practices and these year-long engagements that we've had, which start with a retreat that you see here, these are teachers on retreat in Lake Arrowhead, we have seen teachers completely eliminate their need for expository discipline in the classroom once they understand how to engage with the neurobiology and science in mind, with the mindfulness techniques in mind. And so I know that's more than I could possibly explain to you in 7 minutes, but I just am so excited that we are looking at the ways that teachers' own beingness needs to be centralized in their understanding and relating to students who are at risk of being expelled and put into the school to prison pipeline. So I would just like to share this one slide is an example of them on retreat. It's a 3-day, 2-night retreat where they really go and study their own ACE scores, look at their own nervous system, and really make a commitment to becoming the thermostat that provides a healing presence for the students they serve. So I want to thank you all.
Thank you,
for your
Dr.
time,
Elliott.
and thank you for that extra minute.
Well, we all want to be thermostats, so we appreciate your work. Next, I'd like to introduce Dawn Smith, the Assistant Principal at Santiago High School in Coronanoco Unified School District. Dawn, I need you to unmute yourself.
I'm so sorry. We keep saying that we're not going to do that, and yet, of course, we do. So, at any rate, I can't thank you enough for having me to present. Equity is a passion of mine, and leading teachers to improve equity and access and close the opportunity gap has always been something I work on. And so I am so excited to be here with you today. I am proud to say that I'm an alumni of 2 of our AICCU ed schools, California Baptist University and the University of Laverne. And I'm very excited to share a program that targets students who are underrepresented in advanced placement. This program we call the Advanced Placement Leadership Team was developed by applying theory to practice using a model of distributed leadership, data-informed decision-making, and collective efficacy to empower teachers to increase equity in access to rigorous advanced placement courses. As a result of the work of this team, we have increased the diversity of the students enrolling in AP classes while increasing AP exam pass rates, thereby closing the opportunity gap for our underrepresented students. Our school was awarded a gold ribbon in 2017 for this program. The program began in 2014. So some basic facts about Santiago High School. We have an enrollment of 3,746 students. Our graduation rate is 99.8%. So I can tell you, we beat every bush to get our kids to graduate. We have a free and reduced lunch population of about 25% of our students. Our percentage of students by ethnicity, we have 41% Caucasian, 40% Hispanic or Latino, 4.5% African American, 10.5% Asian, 3% Filipino, and 1% all other races. So you'll see we are a very diverse population. So let's take a look at some of the significant data over the last 5 years. And I'm only going to share with you the big highlights that also align with the team's collective commitments. So student enrollment in AP increased by 21% over the last 5 years, with close to full equity between all races. We have 198 student increase in that. The number of students taking the exam increased by 19%. Which was 196 students. So the students that we're putting into AP are also taking the exam. The percentage of students passing the exam increased by 23%. And that means that they're not only taking the exam, but they're also passing the exam. And to date, overall, 50% of our students in 10th through 12th grade are enrolled in at least one AP course. Now, how did we do this? Well, the journey began when our district started working with equal opportunity schools to close the opportunity gap and ensure that all students had equity and access to our most rigorous academic courses, which of course are advanced placement at my school. Santiago High School had always had a culture of academic excellence, and quite frankly, we thought we were doing a great job in this area. And when we were presented with these ideas, we thought, are you kidding? Look at how great our school is. But in truth, when we reviewed the data, That really wasn't the case. We had gaps, most particularly in our low income Hispanic and Latino populations. So our question was, so what are we going to do about it? Are we going to just accept that some kids aren't going to go into AP, or do we really believe that that's where kids need to be? So the first thing we did was we knew we needed the advanced placement teachers to lead this endeavor. Since they were going to have to make this happen, they needed to not only have a say, but to develop a comprehensive plan for our mission to be successful. And it really had to be the desire of their hearts. It had to be their goal, not our school districts. The teachers had to take ownership, and we had to empower them to do so. So the program was developed over the course of a year with a team of 31, including all the AP teachers, a head counselor, our AVID coordinator, and an administrator, me. One question would drive our collaboration throughout that year. Do we really believe that all students should have a rigorous education to prepare them for career and college? If the answer was yes, then the next question, well, do our beliefs align with our actions and our results? So through a structured collaborative process, these questions were answered and the key pieces of the program were developed, which created a systematic approach to AP equity. And quite frankly, that's what I think is different in so many programs that aren't able to reach the kind of numbers we are. We are extremely systematic about it. First, we developed an equity and access policy that aligned with our vision for AP. And in fact, that now guides every program we have at our school. We have eliminated barriers to enrollment, including no summer assignments, no teacher recommendations. You don't have to have an A or B in the class. Most of the ferreting of eliminating those barriers and dealing with the counselors, that's how we can tell the kids, and frankly, we push them into. They are targeted and they are pushed into advanced placement. So we have a scaffold system of support for intervention for students, because we know our students are not coming to us all with the same backgrounds or the same opportunities. And so we scaffold a support system that was quite intensive. Most of the problems with supports is that kids generally go to tutoring. The teacher has too many kids in there. Some kids just need a question answer. Some kids need the whole thing retaught. So we actually structured the supports in line for what the students need, and the teachers actually target the students for the support they need. They're not just told to come to tutoring. In addition to that, we wanted to model more of the kinds of things that they would have at college. So we implemented student study groups in the libraries 2 nights a week, where students were taught how to actually get involved in study groups and become part of a study group, and how those would help each other. We had a system for targeting students from underrepresented groups that had tons of data. We would actually mine for the students we were missing based on our data and generating reports. And of course, equal opportunity schools helped us to be able to do that and learn how to mine for those kids that we were missing. Professional learning communities were established for all AP teachers. We had already had professional learning communities throughout our school and had time devoted to it once a week for teachers to meet. But AP teachers oftentimes were the Lone Ranger, and they were basically in a lower level professional learning community, not getting a whole lot out of it. So we changed that. We brought on more teachers into AP, where I'd have at least 2 teachers in every AP course, so they could work together to improve their instruction for their students. We offer continual learning opportunities available for professional development, and insist that teachers go to some type of training at least once every couple of years to stay up on current teaching methodologies for advanced placement. The team agreed to meet 3 times a year to evaluate data and to improve instruction. They've made collective commitments, and those are evaluated each year. Their collective commitments are 90% of our students are going to take the exam, and that we are going to hit at least the national average in pass rates across the board. And let me just tell you, they have done that to their commitment over the last 3 years, which I'm so proud of them. We also do something a little different. We call it getting naked with the data. And each year, at the beginning of our school year, I show them all the data individually with each teacher's name on it. And we address how they've done in regards to our collective commitments and hitting, and they've got a plus or a minus by their pass rates. My wonderful teacher team lovingly refers to it as, here we go with the data shaming, but they actually like it, and they feel that it's helped to keep them on track in honoring their collective commitments for this team. Counselors and administrations, we have a not drop policy. So we really force kids to stay in by offering them so many supports and constantly conferencing with them and their parents, bringing their parents into the loop and helping to inform their parents about the kinds of things that we're doing with their kids and where we're taking them. So teachers who want to teach AP have to commit to collaborate and adhere to the team's decision. You're not an island in this. We are all working together. And then, of course, we survey our students for feedback every year to see how we could better improve the program for them. Truly, the effectiveness of this program relies on teachers being empowered and committed to make fundamental changes that impact the lives of all students and ultimately our world. So to develop a program like this, teacher education should include both the development of skills and mindset that are necessary to educate our diverse population and ensure opportunity for all students. Skills such as understanding data, how to generate it, how to interpret it, and monitor and evaluate it for its effectiveness must be understood as foundational to student learning and improvement. In other words, the continuous cycle of improvement model cannot be overemphasized in its importance, not only in the classroom, but to the entire school. And also, new teachers must see that collaboration is the foundation of how they must work together to improve educational equity. For example, the level of rigor and grade should be the same for all 9th grade English language arts classes. So if I'm in Mrs. Smith's class and I'm getting an A, it should indicate the same level of learning that I would get in Mrs. Jones' class with an A. In addition, the all students will succeed mindset must be developed. It must be forged on the belief of continual improvement for self and others. And that must be the driver for what we do. Jim Collins wrote a book, Good is the Enemy of Great. And although it's a little old school for some of us right now, I adhere to that. Good is what holds back so many of us. It held back my school. We thought we were good. We would have never looked at this kind of data unless it was driven by something greater. But I'll tell you, it taught us a lot of lessons in looking at that data. Teachers need to continue to learn and grow and actually become lifelong learners. They have to look for those who are in need and don't continually focus on what's going well. Instead of look for what isn't. Take calculated risk and experiment. Have to be willing to make mistakes. We call it failing forward. And we give our teachers permission to do that. Be an instrument of change. Don't settle for the status quo. Consider your purpose in making a better life for your students and our world, because your job is bigger than you. Check your beliefs. Do they align with your actions? You can't do the job alone. Collaboration and interdependence is paramount in this work. So ultimately, we need teachers to lead the charge for equity and access. We must build their leadership capacity, empower and support them to be culturally responsive to the needs of those who honestly need us the most. If not,
Thank you. Oh, I'm so sorry.
that's all right. I was at the end. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just want to make sure that we leave time at the end for questions, because that was very powerful. And I'm sure that our participants have a lot of questions for you in doing that. Thank you so much. It's important for us to see on the ground what this actually looks like. And you bring that perspective. So thank you so very much. I want to start framing some of the questions for our panelists. Dr. Bracho, we have a question for you that is related to the virtual environment. So what are some ways that you have adopted CLRT and UDL in the virtual space?
Thank you, Kimberly. I actually put some links in the Q&A as a response to that question from Carol. And I just want to share a couple of things that I've been doing with my students that I think incorporate UDL and also CRT. So I think one of the most important parts is that you have to give students options in terms of how they're going to either access the material or also show their understanding. So instead of having always a written response, for example, I'm giving students the option to turn in a video recording, an audio podcast, some way where they maybe narrate some slides so that they have the opportunity to show how they've learned or what they're getting from the course material in a different way. And also providing options, for example, that are very targeted. So as I mentioned, when we do our discussion of CRT, I teach a course where I have single subject candidates, but they're all from different subjects. So I try to really differentiate the content so that some students who are PE get CRT and PE. People who are CRT and science get particular resources. I think in this time in particular, students need the material to be really meeting their specific needs and feel like it's really going to be applicable to their future work. But in terms of the other elements of CRT, and I think just in general, social emotional learning, the engagement piece is really important. So I think about the ways that, for example, I do a lot of scaffolding at the beginning of the lesson. I do a social emotional check-in at the beginning of the session, where students have the chance to, there's this great visual that I can share with you later if you're interested, from the Healing Institute that was going around Facebook and other social media during the pandemic around like, what's your emotional state right now? And having students a chance to just reflect on what their emotional state is, and they can write me privately or write it to the public chat. Students really reveal a lot about what they're going through, and that's a way for me to be responsive because I'm finding out what are they going through, what are the things that they're feeling, what are the things that they need. And then, for example, one week, instead of having a class session, I had students sign up for individual one-on-one times. I called it a cafecito, a little coffee time for those of you who are Latino and know that, coffee time can be a good time to connect with people. So instead of calling it office hours, which can be sort of distancing and sort of create this power dynamic, it's more of like we're just checking in and having a chance to talk to each other about what's going on. And also one of the things, as Dr. Elliott mentioned, having this trauma-informed approach is really important. Obviously, we're all going through a lot of trauma. Our students in particular who are teacher ed are very concerned about their futures. They're worried about what's coming next, about the investments they're making in their careers. And so having that approach and really making space to talk about trauma, making space to do some healing work. I do some meditation, or rather mindfulness work where we look at there's this website called calm.com, and they have this breathing app where you can sort of take a deep breath and sort of watching the breath going in and out. I have check-in breaks in between parts of the online class where they do like stretch breaks, yoga moves in your chair. I show a visual. I'm just trying to find ways to incorporate wellness in class because I feel like that's really what people need right now. So in terms of engagement, that to me is the most important part about how you incorporate UDL, by really thinking about what are people going through, what do they need? This big statement going around, you need to Maslow before you can bloom, right? There's kind of people are saying this during these times. I think that's really important. Meeting their needs first is a way to get them to the academic content, but if we ignore the trauma and the pain and the lived experiences that we're all having, then we're gonna really miss the opportunity to model for them what UDL and CRT can look like for their own students moving forward.
Dr. Elliott, did you have a response to the question as well?
Could you reframe the question for me, please? Just I've been so enraptured with all the awesome things Dr. Bracho is describing he's doing in class. I'm unable to hear you, Dean White-Smith. I'm sorry. I don't know where I lost your voice.
It's because I didn't unmute myself.
Okay.
What are some ways that we see UDL and critical race theory in the virtual space? So what does that look like, for instance, in your training?
Well, with the culturally responsive teaching, particularly and UDL, again, I teach educational neurobiology. So a lot of what we have to do is help people understand how the brain works for learning, particularly again with nervous system regulation at the core of that. So a lot of what Dr. Bracho described are similar things that we do. We do not try to engage the brain from a state of toxic stress. Also removing a lot of the competition. So a lot of our education is based on who does what and how quickly. And again, from a neurodiversity perspective, we know different brains move at different rates and absorb knowledge in different ways. So there's lots of ways that we historically have embedded senses of competition in classrooms rather than collaboration. So we heighten the nervous system triggers of fight, flight, or freeze by putting people under time pressures to show what they know, by pitting them against each other to show what they know, by calling people unannounced and unprepared to have to speak out loud on the spot. So a lot of those things we remove from the space, allowing people to decide which teams they want to be placed on, which topics they want to be grouped on to discuss. Again, giving more agency and choice is really important. And also making sure that, like, when we choose music and things for different mind-body engagements, having the students make the selections instead of the instructors, and having the teachers make a decision to adapt makes a lot of impact for students feeling like they have agency in creating the learning space collectively.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Nash, we know from the research that Black girls tend to be ignored in these types of conversations, and there tends to be a focus or concentrating on our Black males. But we know that 90% of girls who are in the criminal justice system have also experienced sexual abuse, physical and emotional abuse, as well as different types of learning disabilities. Can you talk a little bit about how centering or intersectionality can help us kind of address these issues while still marching forward with an understanding of the context of what's happening?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be happy to. I think intersectionality offers a snapshot of the reality that there's a range of each experience, and that Blackness and being a person of color is not a monolith. And so because there is a difference in experience that informs, as a Black woman, for example, when I wake up in the morning, sometimes I see my Blackness first, sometimes I see my womanhood first. And so what girls are going through in the K-12 experience is informed by their contextual reality. And so intersectionality gives us an opportunity to acknowledge the differences that happen in their lives on a day-to-day basis. And so our intentionality around not deficitizing what their experiences are and their backgrounds, and understanding that the historicity of oppression that has informed our communities but not defined our communities is what we have to learn how to center, and how we have to teach aspiring teachers to do the same. So we're not looking at them from the way we want them to be, but acknowledging who they are and what they bring to school with them every day. And looking at that from an asset-based approach helps us serve them in a better way that does not set them up for those pipelines that then inform, the futures that we've heard about having before.
Thank you so much for that. I have a question for Dr. Smith. When new teachers come to Santiago High School, how are they brought into the inclusive way of thinking, especially the support versus discipline? The increase in opportunity, equity, and pass rates are amazing. Thank you.
Well, we have built a culture of collaboration here. That's not only for the teachers, that's how we all interact together with one another, from the top here down. And I laugh when I say the top, because truly we try to really have a flat structure. That's what allows the teachers to take control and to lead in these things. I often laugh when people say, how do you get your teachers to do anything? Here, are you kidding? We look at the data and say, hey, these kids aren't achieving. What are we going to do about it? So I think so much of it comes from that. In developing this particular team, for example, I trusted that they would have a heart for doing this work, because I know they do. I just gave them an opportunity to do it. So when new teachers come in, they're automatically filtered into this cultural collaborative system. Our students all collaborate. We collaborate with the students. We often bring students together to give us input about how things are working for them. Right now, as we're looking at coming back, we're thinking, even though we can't get together in larger groups, we're thinking of how to bring in some smaller groups and get some feedback from the kids about some of the issues that are going on in our society today and how we can work together. We believe here at our school that we truly are a microcosm of the world. And if we can change things here, then guess what? We can change them everywhere. And I think it's that kind of synergistic approach in the collaboration that just gets everybody going. See, the difference is we really believe we can. We believe all the obstacles can be taken away for the greater good and what we know our mission is. And if we can't do it, we can't give it to someone else to do. We have to figure out a way. And so those kinds of things are instilled here. So if you come here, that's why most of our teachers stay, because they like being able to make change. They like being empowered. And when I said we want them to fail forward and take risks, we tell them that all the time. That's really our expectation, is you will think outside the box. And I can't say enough wonderful things about them, but I will say this program and everything that I've talked about, moving theory to practice, can be replicated in every school if people would just apply the theory that I know that they know to their practice.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And that taking ownership and the responsibility of the outcomes for our students is really central and critical to the work that we're doing, right? And giving them opportunities, the teachers opportunities to really participate in the process of really kind of dismantling a broken system and then re-envisioning it in ways that really center students' academic success, but not just their academic success. I think the really huge learning from the panelists here is that it also has to be their socio-emotional success and healing as well as the healing, right, and opportunity for our teachers. And so a lot of what you're talking about, Dawn, is centering that piece for our teachers as well as for our students. There is a question about being able to share some of the resources. So we'll, after the event is over, we will figure out where we can share PowerPoints or any other resources with you that were shared in the chat. Oh, Dr. Bracho just put his email address in the chat. Are there any other questions from our colleagues in the audience for our panelists?
I actually had a question. This is Anita for Nikki. If we could put one thing in our teacher education program that you've talked about, one thing that you would like to see our candidates coming when they come out into the field, what would that be?
So I would say that, and I joke, not a joke, but I discussed this a few times with colleagues, at the university. What could we take out of the teacher credentialing program to make room for a new class? Because every time I say, we need a class on cultural emotional competency and mindset for teachers, the main thing that I get about my neurobiology class, my students say, your class should have been required before I became a teacher. So I teach in-service special ed teachers. So they're already in the field, they're already in classrooms, learning about their brain, their nervous system, how the things they've experienced shape their nervous system and their own capacity to manage. And they say, this class should have been required before anyone was allowed to be in a classroom. And then other students say, this class should be required before anyone's able to do any job that involves working with human beings. So do we have time for one quick story? I really wanted this one story about one San Bernardino teacher would really help nail it. So we were doing the retreat, the 3-day retreat. We were doing an activity. So the teachers are tossing yarn across the room. We're building string models of the nervous system, and we're building clay models of the brain. So people are tossing clay, tossing yarn, having a good time playing a game. And there's one teacher, a veteran teacher, 20-year professional, more plus, backing up from the group, feeling overwhelmed. When we finish the game and we're debriefing it, it's just feeling like any kind of fun group learning activity you would be doing in school. She's ready to leave the room. And so as we debrief the room and we're talking about how to create safety, belonging for students. She said, that activity made me feel unsafe, Dr. Nikki. And everybody around the room is like looking like, how did you feel unsafe? There's no guns, there's no threat. We're laughing, we're talking, we're tossing clay, we're tossing yarn to each other. And so she just said, I feel unsafe, and she's unsettled and rattled. And so she goes in the corner and she calms down, she leaves the room and gets some water, and she comes back with an epiphany by the end of the day. Now, this is a woman with a high exposure discipline rate in her classroom. She teaches second grade. And we know second and third grade is when our Black boys start really hitting, a lot of these discipline issues. And she says, I had an epiphany because I have all my teachers take the ACE test, so they know their own ACE score, and they start to reflect on how their own ACE score impacts their teaching. She said, I have a high ACE score. I have lots of teachers. Now, 10 is the maximum number on the ACE test. I have a lot of special ed teachers who have ACE scores of 7, 8, 9. She says, I have such a strong need based on my background. I have such a strong need for a sense of control and safety. Things that are loud, things that are unpredictable. When all of this noise was going on, it made me feel unsafe. She said, I just now realized why I don't have interactive games and learning in my classroom. Now I want you all to think about this. This is a woman who teaches second grade, who does not allow second graders to toss yarn and clay and laugh and be loud and be out of their seats and interactive in the classroom, because her nervous system requires ultimate control and predictability in order for her to be safe, based on her nervous system's triggers from her childhood and her high ACE score. So now when you have your squiggly Black and brown boys who are not even developmentally supposed to be expected to sit still and not wiggle and not toss clay and yarn and have fun, they are kicked out of her classroom because of her nervous system's needs, which she is now just understanding at 25 years into the field, that a big part of her discipline practices that have put certain people on the pipeline to school to prison and an expectation that they're bad because they can't sit still in the second grade is a fundamental result of the way this teacher organizes her classroom as a result of her own needs for felt safety. So if you were to ask me what is one fundamental thing that every teacher needs this exploration. And that's why I love that San Bernardino has invested in these retreats. Now we're pulling in-service teachers in to reflect. I can't tell you how many people are in tears in these retreats, crying about what they have done to children before they knew what they know now. The amount of regret is palpable and it's significant. And we have to do a lot of healing work with the teachers to help them forgive themselves for the things that they did when they didn't know. And so we really have to unpack at that deepest level. And if it was left up to me, I would blow up the teacher prep program and make that the foundational course for everyone.
Thank you, Nikki. I think there was another question I sent it to Kimberly. Did you get it about books recommended?
Yeah. So the question is, sorry, what are the 2 or 3 book recommendations or article recommendations that you would give on neurobiology?
The best entry-level thing that I could share that really helps understand this teacher perspective is called The Invisible Classroom by Kirk Olson. It really helps to frame polyvagal theory and the theory around felt safety and what teachers do or do not do that create proper and healthy co-regulation for students to learn, especially those who've been exposed to trauma, abuse, or neglect. There's a specific nervous system state that we have to be in as a teacher in order to help provide a healing presence and not to further exacerbate the behaviors that we then interpret as behaviors worthy of exclusionary discipline. So The Invisible Classroom by Kirk Olson would be a great foundational piece.
Can you type that into the chat for us?
Yes.
That would be great. Thank you so much for that.
I only see panelists. I don't see everyone. Where's?
Panelists and attendees.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
I just looked it up. If I could share it. Is this what you're talking about, Nikki?
That would be a great foundational piece.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I always
Thank
give
you.
a visual because it helps people.
And then the
Bettina
second
just-
piece would be the social neuroscience of education. And I'll type that one in too, by Louis Cozzolino at Pepperdine.
Awesome. While you're doing that, I'd like to ask the panelists, are there any closing remarks or things that you would like to leave the community with? I'll start with Dr. Nash.
I'd like to share a visual if I could as I make this last point.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Can you see this? I'd like to say that while this is a moment that Dr. Dean Whitesmith explained is based on the impetus and the springboard of all that we have experienced over the last, 6 to 7 months, particularly understanding how this summer influenced our attention towards what is going on in our world and what has been going on, for decades. I would like to implore everyone not to use this as a brief moment in time to inform their commitment and their attention to supporting Black and Brown students, but moving beyond a snapshot approach to it and thinking long-term. To Nikki's point about, really shaking up teacher education, we have to do that beyond this moment. And, a year from now, I'd hope that what we've shared is something that is continuing to impact the way we prepare teachers. And 5 years from now, we're moving, beyond that even. And we're not just freeze framing what we've been, inspired or motivated by to encourage our teachers and our aspiring teachers to make differences in their class that really inform, impact, and influence Black and Brown students' lives, but long-term, that we continue this commitment in a way that gives them lasting success. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Dr. Bracho?
Thanks, everybody. I just saw a question pop up that I actually think reflects what I was going to talk about. The question is, do you come across teachers or teacher candidates refusing to reflect on their own bias or the way their system impacts their instruction? How do we navigate that? And I want to give you an example, actually. Last spring, before we talked about restorative practices, we were talking about just classroom dynamics, and a white male, said that when he enters a room, especially when he's subbing, he feels like he has to assert his authority. And so he said in class, this was actually online because this is during the pandemic already. He said, I think of myself as a warden, and I have to sort of, demand authority and control, And I looked at my decision-making matrix, right? Like, what is the purpose of this behavior? When is the right time to intervene? I realized I had to intervene in that moment to really, clarify. And I said very clearly, but very kindly, and with a lot of empathy in my heart, I think you should never think of yourself as that, and you should get rid of any metaphor in your head where you compare what you're doing to a prison or a jail. That is exactly the kind of mindset you do not want to have when you walk into a classroom. And I explained, something about the school to prison pipeline. I gave him some previews of what we're going to talk about in the coming weeks about restorative practices in the school to prison pipeline. And he actually reached out to me over email and said, I feel really bad that I said that. I'm so sorry. And so then we actually had a conversation about it. And he's a really good student. I think he has a really good heart. But I think that a lot of students bring with them that kind of idea that they have to sort of demand control, and that they're in a jail or a prison context. And I was really concerned because I know that the student works in a school with lots of Black and brown boys and girls, And so I think that you have to be really ready as an educator to, in the moment, sometimes say it clearly in front of everybody, and not because you want to shame, but say, this is the moment where I have to really clearly say this is not okay to think this way, but then follow up. And I'm really glad that he did, because I felt like he understood that I was saying this kind of thinking really goes against the kind of teacher we want to create and the kind of educational system we want to produce. And I think that, so you have to be, I think, empathetic, but also forceful, and saying that kind of thinking is not the kind of disposition that we want to build in our teachers, and actually is part of the problem, you know. But I think it's about when you have those kind of caring relationships, when you demonstrate caring, that you're able to then have those kind of transformative conversations. Because I think sometimes students, teacher candidates feel attacked, they're very vulnerable, and as Dr. Elliott mentioned, even people 25 years later are realizing that their own biases, that the way that they think about the world and their own experiences, they're projecting that onto their students and actually limiting the free expression of the students that they have in their room, right? So I guess it's just a minor example of the ways that you have to sort of be willing to call it out when you hear it in your teacher candidates discourse about what they're doing in the classroom, and be willing to be empathetic and build that relationship over time and open it up, because it's through that dialogue that you're able to move towards a shared understanding about what's the kind of teacher and what kind of education we want to create.
Thank you so much. Dr. Elliott, would you like to go next?
Well, I feel like I took a lot of time. I want to thank you for giving me the time to share that story. It just really, truly sums up the heart of what I feel makes the difference. Again, seeing San Bernardino Unified being willing to invest in this deep level of immersion retreat work and this year-long kind of investment in teachers understanding and unpacking themselves. We have this quote that I share: be the thermostat, not the thermometer. And so for every teacher to find the way in their heart, mind, nervous system to become the one who sets a temperature of healing, a temperature of cooperation, a temperature of collaboration, a temperature of possibility, rather than being the one who reflects the thermometer that just reacts to cold when it's cold, or reacts to chaos when the kids are chaotic. Because those of us who can be a thermostat are able to radiate and co-regulate in ways that engage the brain to heal and to rewire itself. We have more waking hours with our children to provide a healing presence than the number of waking hours they spend at home or in communities that may be more challenging outside of the pandemic. So to never allow a teacher to forget or give up the amount of power that we have as educators to turn the tide from a physiological basis to help each other heal before the learning starts.
Thank you so much. What you just said affirms the research that we know to be true, that teachers are the most influential component in the educational attainment of a child. And so with that, so I see on your screen, Don, that it says your last name is White, but I have that your last name is Smith. Is your last name White Smith like mine? Are we sisters? Like, what's going on?
No, but I'm also a Smith, so there you go. We must be related in some way. I say all the Smiths are related.
There it is.
Anyway, in conclusion, what I would say is the work you're all doing is wonderful. And coming to tell you what else needs to be into practice is kind of funny, because you're doing such wonderful things already. I would say the one thing that I didn't talk about that I think for this particular team and the growth of this team, and I would suggest this for all teachers and schools, we created a safe place where this team could really talk. And when I started this team, I mean, you know, I had teachers that only believed the top 5% of our students should be in advanced placement, you know, kind of the bell curve kind of thing. And then I had some teachers where come one, come all, you know, we'll take them all, and then a lot in the middle. But we needed to create a safe place where teachers could talk about this, and we could talk about our bias, why we thought only 5% should do this. And that's where we checked our beliefs and came together. And there were some heated conversations, I'll be honest, but we had the trust of one another where we could have those tough conversations. And at the end of the day, we all came together because no matter what, we all need to see how other people think about things. And it's through the conversation that we are able to come to terms with where we really want to go and what we want to give back to people. So I just say they need to understand, teachers need to understand that their role is so much greater, and that can, you know, hurt some people because their role is so large, but truly it is, because again, if we don't do it, who's going to do it? So I applaud all the work you're doing. I'm proud to say that whatever work I've been able to do, you know, got my doctorate at the University of Laverne. So I was able to employ all of those theories into my practice. And I'm so proud to be a part and to have it as my alma mater, and certainly the work we're able to do here. The last thing I would say is we're looking at teacher education programs, but understand that the master's programs and the doctoral programs, anything in education, all of these things are consistently instilled, and then hopefully we'll all go out and do the work that needs to be done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing with us this morning. This was an extremely insightful and powerful discussion. And I got a lot of information from and side notes from folks like, this is amazing, we need to be doing more of this. So thank you so much. Some of the learning that I got from the panel today kind of reaffirms what we know to be true from the research, and that is none of this can get done without people who are willing to focus in on equity and justice and academic justice for our students. If we can't get to that, then none of this is going to work. So thank you all for being courageous and fearless and doing this work and moving forward. The other pieces that are really critical and important, I think, moving forward is definitely understanding deficit ideology and dismantling that for ourselves. And every person, regardless of their own personal identity, has opportunity to engage with deficit ideology. We watch television, we see the news, we're exposed to it all the time. And even for myself, I know that it is a constant mental battle to really kind of stem this deficit tide and really put forward an assets-based ideology for the communities and the students that we serve. So that is critically important, and something that Dr. Smith mentioned in her talk, and that is really eliminating barriers to students' success, really eliminating barriers from our communities to participate and really co-create educational experiences with our school environments is so critical and very important. So thank you all so much for your work. Dr. Flemington, thank you for the opportunity, and I turn this over to you.
Well, thank you so much. I will just end again saying thank you, and thank you for all who came to listen to this wonderful, informative panel. We have recorded this, and it will be on our Cal Council site. We're doing some exciting things with YouTube and uploading. Also, we have some wonderful research videos that are up on our site also. So I'm not sure how long it's going to take Sarah to put these up, but I'm sure it'll be a few days or after the conference that the panel will also be up on our Cal Council website. Again, I want to say thank you for everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule. And for those who came to hear the panelists, thank you again. Well, with that, I will say thank you. And unless someone has something else to say, I will say goodbye.